Most people think forgetting is a failure, a weakness, a glitch, a leak in the mind. Still, forgetting is also how you survive your own past. The sharp edges soften. The story changes shape. The version of you who made the mistake becomes harder to access. That isn't denial. That is growth. This is usually the moment people realize identity isn't a file you open. It's a story you're constantly rewriting. AI doesn't work like that. It does not carry shame. It does not flinch. It does not move on. It stores, it recalls, it connects. If the future is built on systems that remember everything you've ever been, becoming someone new stops feeling natural. It starts feeling like a negotiation with an archive. Human identity is not just memory, it's selective memory. The mind edits, it compresses, it reinterprets. Two people can live the same day and remember different worlds. Over time, you forget details and keep meaning. That's how the past becomes bearable. That's how you forgive yourself, sometimes without even noticing. This is usually when people discover that healing often looks like distance, not clarity. For most of human history, your past was protected by friction. Someone might remember a story about you, but they forget the details. A record might exist, but it lives in a drawer. A moment might be captured, but it fades. Forgetting did not erase reality. It just gave your identity room to breathe. The ability to fade was never a luxury. It was part of what made change possible. Perfect recall doesn't arrive as a villain. It arrives as help, a system that remembers your preferences, a tool that keeps your history, a model that notices your patterns better than you do. It feels harmless because it feels personal. It feels like continuity. Behind the scenes, modern systems are increasingly designed to retain, retrieve, and recombine information because it improves performance, which is exactly why data governance and retention questions keep resurfacing in every serious AI risk framework. This is usually the moment convenience quietly becomes a kind of dependency. The memory doesn't have to be a video of your life. It can be something quieter. The way you write, the way you hesitate, the way you react to certain topics, the sequence of choices you tend to make under stress. That is still memory, not emotional memory. Behavioral memory, a map of your likely self. When a system can predict you accurately, it doesn't need to know everything you did. It only needs to know what you tend to do next. That is where remembering stops being a diary. It becomes a model of you. Now comes the uncomfortable part. Growth relies on a kind of forgetting. You outgrow your old self, partly because the world stops replaying that version of you back to you. A bad year becomes a chapter, a mistake becomes a lesson, a phase becomes a memory you rarely visit. Perfect recall changes that relationship. When the past can always be resurfaced, the old you never fully leaves the room. This is usually the moment people stop taking risks, not because they became wise, but because the cost of being wrong became permanent. Imagine trying to be forgiven in a world that never forgets. Not because people are cruel, because the record is always available. A first impression becomes sticky, an old message becomes a shadow, a teenage joke becomes a lifelong artifact. Even the legal world has had to acknowledge the human need for erasure and limitation in certain circumstances, which is why the right to be forgotten exists at all as a concept in modern data protection law. That right exists because permanence changes behavior. Permanence changes identity. Still, the deeper problem here is psychological, not legal. If every version of you stays searchable, what happens to the feeling of becoming? A person is meant to be more than their most documented moment. A person is meant to be allowed to change privately. Perfect recall removes privacy in a subtler way. It makes your history feel present. It turns your life into a profile you can't escape, even when you're trying to be better than the profile suggests. The saddest part is that AI doesn't intend to trap you. It doesn't hate you, it doesn't judge, it simply remembers. The trap comes from the world built around that memory. Systems optimize for consistency. Institutions optimize for risk reduction. People optimize for certainty. Once the world can retrieve your past instantly, it becomes tempting to use it as proof of who you are. If your past is always available, even to you, how often do you choose who you're becoming? And how often do you let the record decide, not who you were, who you are? This is usually when identity stops feeling like a journey and starts feeling like a verdict. So what does growth look like in a world like that? It might become harder. It might become more deliberate. It might require a new kind of courage. The courage to change even when the evidence of your old self never disappears. A future like this would force a strange question back into our lives. Are you allowed to be more than your archive? Because if the answer becomes no, identity shrinks. Forgiveness shrinks. People become cautious versions of themselves, not because they became better, because they became monitored by permanence. The human mind forgets so you can keep living. AI remembers so it can keep predicting. If those two logics collide everywhere, the most important human right might become something we used to take for granted. The right to fade. The right to be new. I didn't realize how much of who I am depends on what I've been allowed to leave behind, until I imagined a world where nothing about me is ever allowed to fade. If this shifted how you think about what forgetting is really for, tap like. It helps surface conversations that usually stay buried beneath convenience and optimization. Subscribe to become part of the Unlocked, where we explore the forces quietly reshaping identity, meaning, and the future we're building inside. If someone you know still thinks memory is always a gift, share this with them. Because a life you can't outgrow is not a life you can freely live. Because the future isn't coming, it's already here.